Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. Usually when we crack open a sci-fi novel on this show, we're looking for the tech, we're
Yeah.
looking for the warp drives, the AI uprisings, the chrome, the neon.
Right, the shiny stuff,
The-
the
the-
escapism.
Exactly, the shiny stuff that distracts us from reality.
Yeah.
But today we are looking at something that feels a little less like an escape and a lot more like a fire drill. We are diving into Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower. And I want to be clear right off the bat, we are not doing a literary review here.
No, definitely not. If you want to talk about prose style or metaphors, there are plenty of other shows for that. We are treating this text as a simulation, a systems-level institutional case study. Books are entry points. Identity equals systems.
A war game.
Yeah, exactly, a war game. We're looking at a specific model of systemic collapse under environmental degradation, institutional erosion, and economic fragmentation. And more importantly, how adaptive belief systems emerge within that breakdown.
And the timeline for this simulation is, well, it's uncomfortable. The book starts in 2024.
Which is right now.
Right. And it runs through 2027. We are in near-future California. The backstory isn't nuclear war. It isn't an alien invasion. Butler calls it the pox. But looking at the sources, the pox feels incredibly familiar. It's a convergence.
It's a threat multiplier scenario. You have climate instability driving economic decay. And then economic decay drives social fragmentation. It's a feedback loop. And what makes this such a vital text for us to analyze is that the apocalypse isn't an event. It's a process.
That's the key insight I wrote down. The apocalypse is an erosion. It's a slow, grinding decline of norms and services. It's what happens when the things we take for granted, tap water, police protection, the idea that a dollar is worth a dollar, they don't vanish overnight, they just curdle.
They curdle into something predatory. And that is what we are going to trace today through our structural arc. We're going to map the design, the incentives, the outcomes, the persistence of this broken world, and finally, interconnection.
So let's drop into the war room. Let's look at the terrain. In this version of California, geography isn't just a setting, it's destiny. We're following a protagonist, Lauren Olamina. She's young, she's sharp, but where she lives dictates absolutely everything about her survival. She's in Robledo. Paint the picture for me. What does home look like in this simulation?
Home is a fortress. Lauren lives in a walled cul-de-sac. And I don't mean a gated community with a nice keypad and a sleepy security guard. I mean a defensive perimeter. The wall is the defining feature of her existence.
It's a micro-institution.
That's the perfect way to put it. Because the macro institution has failed, the wall becomes the state. It substitutes for failing state capacity. Inside the wall, you have a cluster of families. They are what's left of the middle class. They have houses, they have gardens, they have a semblance of the good old days.
It's a siege mentality.
It is a permanent siege. Outside that wall, civil society has completely evaporated. You have the street poor, you have mass poverty and homelessness on a scale that makes our current crisis look manageable. Pervasive, unchecked violence. And the people inside the wall are clinging to this illusion that if they just stay quiet...
Did they just keep the gate locked?
Right, the storm will pass.
There's this recurring theme that the wall is the only thing separating civilization from chaos. But reading closely, the civilization inside feels incredibly fragile. They aren't thriving. They're suffocating.
And this brings us to the erosion of authority, which is the most chilling part of Butler's model. In a standard Hollywood movie, when things go bad, the government disappears, the White House blows up, the army disbands, anarchy.
Right, the Mad Max scenario.
Exactly. But Butler is smarter than that. In her later breakdown, the government doesn't disappear. It retreats. The state is still there. They still elect presidents. They still collect taxes.
That's the kicker for me.
Yeah.
The IRS still works, but the 911 operator doesn't.
Well, the 911 operator works, but the service has changed. Let's look at the police. In a functioning democracy, the police are a public good. You pay taxes, they provide security. It's a social contract. Here, policing has been completely marketized, privatized security.
It's pay-to-play law enforcement.
It's worse than that. It's predatory entrepreneurship. If you call the police, they charge a fee just to investigate. It's a service call, like calling a plumber. But because there is no oversight, the police have become indistinguishable from the criminals.
There are scenes where the police arrive at a crime scene, and instead of taking a report, they look around to see what's left to steal.
They join the looting. Why?
Right.
Because the incentive structure has shifted. If the state doesn't pay them a living wage, or if the currency is worthless, they have to extract value from the population. They aren't public servants, they are armed resource
It
extractors.
reminds me of how historically in failing empires, the army would just start pillaging its own countryside because the capital stopped sending checks.
That is exactly the historical parallel. It's the feudalization of the state. And it's not just the police. The detail that really stuck with me is the fire department.
Oh, absolutely. This is the one that keeps me up at night. Fire services are fully privatized.
So a fire starts, the truck shows up, but they don't unroll the hoses until they see the contract or the cash.
And if you can't pay?
They stand there, they watch it burn. Their job shifts from fighting the fire to containment. They ensure the fire doesn't spread to the property of a paying customer next door. It's the ultimate commodification of safety. If you are poor, you burn.
But wait, let's play devil's advocate here for a second. If the fire burns the poor person's house, isn't that a risk to the paying customer anyway? Fire spreads.
It is a risk,
Alarm.
and that's why the containment fee is key. The wealthy, or the insured, pay the fire department to water down their roofs while the neighbor's house goes up in flames. It creates a landscape where safety is strictly a private good. You cannot rely on the commons because the commons no longer exist.
This creates what you called an infrastructure of scarcity. It's not just that things are expensive, it's that the basic building blocks of life have been turned into luxury goods.
Let's talk about water. In this near future California, water is more expensive than gasoline.
Pause on that for a second. Water is more expensive than gas.
Yeah,
That flips the entire economic logic of the 20th century on its head.
it does. And think about the downstream effects of that price signal. If gas is cheap relative to water, but nobody has any money, the gas doesn't matter. You have this haunting image of cars, symbols of American freedom and mobility rotting in driveways.
They've been cannibalized.
Right, stripped for metal, turned into planters, or just left to rust. People are walking or riding bikes. It's this high-tech feudalism where you might have a gun and a radio, but you are living with the mobility of a peasant from the 1800s.
And the lighting. We have to talk about the lighting.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, the city of lights. In the book, the lights are gone.
Due to infrastructural decay, energy costs, and just general poverty, the massive light pollution of Southern California has vanished. And the result is that for the first time in a century, the people in the suburbs can see the stars.
There's a moment with Lauren and her stepmother. They're looking up at the Milky Way. And the stepmother is sad about it.
She hates it. She wants the street lights back. She wants the light pollution because that pollution signified progress. It signified safety. The stars, to her, represent the failure of civilization. But for Lauren, the stars are clarity.
It's a perfect visual for the shifting paradigm. The artificial lights, the comfortable lies of the old world have failed, and now everyone is staring into the cold, vast reality of the universe.
And that reality is a vacuum, a power vacuum. We established that the state collects taxes but gives nothing back. So what happens to the social fabric inside the walled community? What does that pressure do to the neighbors?
Well, they arm themselves, heavily. The rule is simple. Go out in a bunch and go armed.
It militarizes daily life. You can't just run to the corner store for milk. A trip to church becomes a tactical patrol. You have point men. You have rear guards.
And this changes the psychology. When every stranger is a potential lethal threat, your circle of empathy shrinks. You stop seeing people. You see targets. You see resource competitors.
Which brings us to the incentive architecture. Because if the structure is broken, if the police are thieves and the firefighters are extortionists, then the incentives for the average person shift dramatically. Behavior that we would classify today as sociopathic becomes a rational survival response.
Let's look at the street economy, outside the wall.
Okay, let's break down the behavioral economics here. You are outside the wall. You have no job, no state aid. Water costs a week's wages. You are starving. Violence isn't just cruelty in that scenario. Violence is an acquisition strategy.
It's a job.
It is the only job available for many. If you have a knife and that person has a bottle of water, taking the water is the only way you see tomorrow. Scarcity, insecurity, and weakened rule of law completely reshape individual behavior.
But there are people trying to run businesses. The water peddlers.
The water peddlers are a fascinating example of high-risk, high-reward economics. They control a scarce resource. They sell water to the street poor. But because they are walking around with liquid gold, they are constant targets.
They get killed for their inventory all the time.
Constantly. But people still do it. Why? Because the payout is massive. It creates a hyper-violent market where the cost of doing business is your life. Roaming violence emerges as a totally rational response to collapsing public goods.
And then you have the paints.
Yeah. This is where Butler introduces a new variable, a chemical variable.
This part really disturbed me. Describe the paints for the listener.
The paints are addicts. There is a new designer drug on the street, a pyro drug. It tweaks the brain's pleasure centers so that watching a fire isn't just exciting, it's orgasmic. It creates a visceral, overwhelming sensation of beauty and pleasure.
So you have people addicted to arson.
They shave their heads, they paint their skin green or blue to identify themselves, hence the name paints, and they set fires. But here is the systems analysis part. They aren't just chaotic agents, they are weaponized.
Weaponized by whom?
By the gangs and the looters. Think about the tactical problem of a walled community. It's hard to breach. But if you have a group of crazed addicts who want to set on fire, you unleash them. The paints set the fires, creating panic and chaos. The homeowners rush to put out the flames. And remember, the fire department isn't coming unless you pay.
And while the homeowners are fighting the fire,
the looters strip the house. The paints are the shock troops of this scavenging economy. It's a symbiotic relationship between chemical addiction and predatory economics. The addicts get their fix, and the looters get the goods.
that is terrifyingly efficient. So you have this violent anarchy outside. But then we have to look at the other response to chaos, because not everyone becomes a looter. Some organizations try to reestablish order, but the price of that order is steep. We need to talk about Olivar.
The Olivar case study. This is the part of the deep dive that usually makes people stop and say, wait, I've read about this in the news.
Olivar is a coastal town, right?
Yeah, think wealthy seaside California. Or it used to be wealthy. But due to climate change, the sea level is rising, the cliffs are eroding, the town is physically crumbling into the ocean. And economically, the town is bankrupt. They can't fix the seawalls. They can't pay their police.
It's a failed municipality.
Enter KSF, Kagimoto, Stam, Frampton, a massive international conglomerate. They make a buyout offer.
Corporate enclave.
Exactly. It's a privatization of sovereignty. KSF says to the town council, we will take over. We will build a desalination plant, solving your water crisis. We will shore up the cliffs. We will bring in our own private security force to keep the street poor out. We will provide jobs.
It sounds like a lifeline.
It sounds like salvation. But there is a catch. There is always a catch. The catch is that the town ceases to be a public entity. It becomes a private holding of KSF.
And the residents?
They aren't citizens anymore. They are employees. And to pay for all this infrastructure, the salaries KSF pays are tiny. They basically just cover room and board within the KSF system.
So you trade your democracy for a paycheck, but the paycheck just goes back to the company store.
Exactly. It is the return of the company town model from the late 19th century, but supercharged with modern technology and desperation. The middle class accepts this. They vote for it.
Why?
Because the alternative is Robledo. The alternative is the wall, the paints, and starvation. They are making a rational choice within a collapsing system. They trade freedom for a guarantee of survival. It raises the ultimate question, how much sovereignty are you willing to sell to ensure your kids have clean water tomorrow?
And that's the trap. It's not forced at gunpoint initially. It's signed on the dotted line. It's consensual feudalism. Now, amidst all these macro incentives, money, water, safety, we have our protagonist, Lauren. And she has a unique structural constraint of her own, a biological constraint.
Hyperempathy.
Hyperempathy syndrome. It sounds like a superpower, but it functions structurally, not merely psychologically, as a major constraint within this high-violence environment.
It's a vulnerability. The book explains it as an organic delusional syndrome caused by her mother abusing a smart drug called Parachenko while pregnant. But the effect is incredibly visceral. If Lauren sees someone in pain, she feels that pain.
Physically.
Physically. If she sees you cut your finger, her finger throbs. If she sees a guy get beaten to death, she feels the blows. If she shoots an attacker, she feels the bullet impact her own body.
Think about that as a systems constraint. We just established that in this world, violence is the primary currency. Might makes it right. But Lauren is biologically punished for using that currency.
She can't just be a warlord. She can't be a tough guy survivor who tramples people to get to the top. It completely changes her survival strategy.
It forces her into cooperation.
Correct. She must build a community where people are safe. Not because she's a saint, not because of some abstract morality, but because if her neighbors are hurting, she is in agony. It is a biological mandate for empathy-based governance. She physically cannot ignore the suffering of others.
That is a fascinating inversion. The weakness becomes the driver for the only sustainable social model. While everyone else is building higher walls or joining corporate serfdom, Lauren is forced to build a network of care just to stop her own pain.
And that network, that interconnectedness, is what eventually leads to Earthseed. But before we get to the solution, we have to trace the predictable structural outcomes of the current broken system. We've looked at the design, we've looked at the incentives. Now let's look at what happens when you run the simulation for a few years.
Right, the outcomes. And the first one is the feedback loop of distrust. So we know the people inside the wall are scared, but shouldn't that external threat bring them closer together? Us against the world?
You would think so. That's the Hollywood version. But in a scarcity model, the threat isn't just outside, it's inside. Because everyone is hungry and everyone knows that the wall is fragile. If my neighbor steals my chickens or my water, that's not just petty theft, that's a threat to my life. So grudges escalate.
There's a specific mechanism involving arson between neighbors.
Right. People use fire, the very thing they're terrified of, as a weapon against each other inside the wall. If you have a dispute, you don't sue them. The courts take forever and cost a fortune. You burn them out. Distrust accelerates fragmentation.
Which creates more breaches in the wall, which lets the outside in.
Exactly. It's a suicide pact. Lauren observes this. She says, we're a rope breaking a single strand at a time. The fragmentation prevents collective action. Because they are so busy watching their neighbors, they cannot organize a defense against the gangs or the paints. The feedback loops just deepen the instability.
It effectively neutralizes the community before the attack even happens.
It creates a vacuum where social capital used to be. And where social capital vanishes, exploitation moves in. Which brings us to the labor market.
We touched on Olivar and the company town, but it gets darker. Let's map how privatization without accountability produces labor exploitation. Debt slavery.
This is where Butler analyzes what happens to capitalism when you remove the floor of regulation. We meet a character named Emery later in the book. She was a farm worker.
A farm worker for a big agribusiness conglomerate, right, not a family farm.
Correct. These are massive corporate entities that have bought up the Central Valley. Emery's story is a textbook example of the truck system, or debt peonage.
Walk us through the mechanism. How do they trap her?
It's simple. The company hires desperate people refugees, basically. They offer them a job and a place to sleep, but they pay them in company scrip.
Fake money.
Money that is only valid at the company store. You can't spend it anywhere else. You can't save it to move away.
And let me guess, the prices at the company store aren't exactly competitive.
The prices are predatory. They're set higher than the wages. So to eat, to drink, to have clothes, the workers have to borrow against future wages.
So they go into debt instantly.
Instantly. And once you are in debt, the trap snaps shut. The government, remember, the state is still there, passing laws for the donors, has made it a crime to leave an employer while you owe money.
Quitting is illegal.
Quitting is a felony, and it gets worse. The debt is heritable. If a mother dies owing the company money, her children inherit the debt. They are born into indenture.
That is chattel slavery. They just changed the letterhead.
It is the reinvention of slavery using capitalist mechanisms. And the terrifying part of the case study is that it is a predictable structural outcome. When you have an infinite supply of desperate labor, thanks to the climate refugees and zero regulation, the market value of a human life drops to zero. You become a disposable component.
Speaking of that infinite supply of labor, we have to talk about the river of walkers. This shows how environmental stress amplifies inequality.
Climate change here isn't just about it being hot. It's about movement. The book describes the 118 and the 101 freeways.
But they aren't filled with cars.
No, they are filled with people. A literal river of humanity walking north, following the water. The South is drying up. They are looking for jobs in Oregon, Washington, Canada. It's a mass migration event, and this flow of people creates a lethal geography.
How so?
Because the people who still have land, who still have water along that route, they have to defend it. They see the walkers not as humans, but as a swarm of locusts. It cements a caste system. You are either a have inside a wall with a gun, or you are a walker on the road, susceptible to being captured, killed, or enslaved.
So we have this horrific system. It's cruel, it's inefficient, it's collapsing, and yet it persists. We need to map this institutional reinforcement. Why doesn't everyone just look around and say this isn't working?
That is the persistence part of our deep dive. Why do systems linger after they are dead? How does institutional weakness incentivize further withdrawal from public systems? And it centers on the psychology of the people inside. Normalcy bias.
Lauren's father is the perfect case study for this. He's a smart man, he's a professor, a minister, a community leader. He's not stupid.
But he's in denial. He represents the ideology of restoration. He believes that the chaos is a temporary aberration. He thinks if they just hold on, if they vote for the right president, if they pray hard enough, the old order will return.
He refuses to prepare for the worst because he thinks preparing for it makes it real. Fear reinforces isolation, reducing collective capacity to rebuild.
Exactly. He sees the cliff, but he convinces himself the bridge is still there. The residents of Robledo don't have go bags. They don't have a plan for if the wall is breached. Because if you pack a go bag, you are admitting that the wall will fall, and they can't emotionally handle that truth.
And the system feeds this delusion, institutional zombieism.
It's when institutions are dead, but they keep walking around. Money is a great example. Inflation is rampant. A loaf of bread costs thousands of dollars. But people still use the money. They still go to work for the money.
In elections.
Elections are the ultimate zombie ritual here. They elect President Donner. He runs on a platform of returning to glory, and people vote for him.
Even though he's the one dismantling the labor laws.
Even though he is actively making their lives worse by suspending minimum wage and environmental protections. But the act of voting makes people feel like citizens of a democracy. It masks the reality that the social contract has expired. Legitimacy crises prevent institutional renewal.
It's a pacifier.
It's a blindfold. There's a line from a character named Bankole, whom Lauren meets later. He looks at the state of the country and says, "We haven't hit bottom yet."
That's a heavy realization.
It implies that the persistence of the collapse is self-reinforcing. Collapse becomes self-reinforcing when governance capacity erodes below recovery thresholds. The capacity to rebuild trust, resources, health is being eroded faster than it can be replenished. Fragmented authority prevents coordinated repair. You can't just bounce back when you've eaten your seed corn.
But eventually, gravity wins. The denial runs out. The micro-institution collapses.
It does. The wall falls. And it's brutal. The paints and the scavengers finally overrun Robledo. The static defense of the wall fails against the dynamic threat of fire and mass desperation.
And this is the pivot point. Lauren loses everything. Her father, her home, her wall. She is forced out onto the road, into that river of walkers.
And this is where the case study shifts. We move from analyzing how a system collapses to analyzing how a new system acts as a structural adaptive response.
Enter Earthseed.
Earthseed. Now, throughout the book, Lauren has been writing these verses. The core tenet, the headline is God is change.
We need to unpack this carefully because when you hear God, you think theology, you think religion. But Earthseed isn't really a religion in the traditional sense. It's a governance philosophy.
Right, let's look at the old system, her father's system. In that view, God is a static protector, a king. You pray to him and he maintains order. It's a hierarchical, monarchical view of the universe. It relies on a central authority to save you.
Which mirrors the reliance on the federal government.
Exactly. Please, President, save us. Please, God, save us. It's passive.
And Lauren's view.
Lauren looks at the world around her, the entropy, the fire, the decay, and she says, that is the only truth. The only thing that is permanent is change. So if God is change, you cannot pray to it for safety. You cannot stop it.
You can only shape it.
God is clay. That is the line. You can shape change. It shifts the agency from a sky father to the individual and the community. Earthseed reframes instability as constant, requiring proactive shaping rather than nostalgic restoration. It says, we are responsible for the outcome of this chaos.
There's a quote she uses, civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals.
Yes. Lauren realizes that the old civilization, the one her father is waiting for, failed because it couldn't adapt. It was rigid. It broke. She situates belief formation as an adaptive tool within collapsing systems. She builds a community based on adaptability.
But she also gives them a goal, the destiny.
The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars.
Right. They are walking through a burning California, dodging cannibals and slavers. They are hungry, they are dirty, and she's talking about interstellar travel. It seems insane.
It seems delusional, but structurally it's brilliant. In a collapsing world where life is nasty, brutish, and short, a community needs a goal larger than mere survival.
Because if the goal is just survive, you enter a zero-sum game.
Exactly. If the only goal is don't die today, then I might kill you to get the last scrap of bread. But if the goal is build a rocket ship in 200 years, then I need you. I need your children. I need your skills.
It transforms the game into a non-zero-sum interaction.
It provides a positive obsession to counter the destructive obsession of the environment. It unifies the group around a multi-generational project. It gives them a future to protect rather than just a past to mourn.
So she builds this group, a heterogeneous mix. You have Lauren, the hyper-empath. You have Bang Cole, an older doctor. You have Zara, who survived a polygamous protected living situation. Travis and Natividad. Emery, the escaped debt slave we mentioned.
Different races, different ages, different backgrounds. And notice how they govern themselves. They do not use debt. They do not use force.
They use shared defense and shared resources.
And this brings us back to interconnection. They realize they cannot survive alone.
The hyperempathy model, the idea that I feel your pain, becomes the blueprint for the new social contract.
Shared pain requires shared care. Bankole has land in Humboldt. They aren't going there to build a fortress. They're going there to plant seeds. Literally and metaphorically, they are trying to build a system that metabolizes change rather than resisting it.
And this is where we reconnect Butler's fictional model to larger nested systems. We see climate governance failing, late-stage economic inequality driving labor exploitation, privatized public goods creating corporate fiefdoms, ideological fragmentation isolating communities, and ultimately resilience theory emerging through Earthseed.
It is a masterclass in systems thinking.
So looking at Butler's model and everything we've discussed today, what is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis is a category error, a failure of classification. What is being misperceived is the nature of the chaos. The characters, and often the readers, perceive the chaos as crime or bad luck or temporary political failure. They think they are living in a rough patch of the same old story.
But the structural layer is completely obscured.
Right. What is actually happening is a phase shift in civilization. The old industrial democratic systems are metabolizing into feudal corporate oligarchies.
So surface dystopian framing fails.
Calling it a dystopia implies it is a fictional worst-case scenario, a malfunction. The crisis in perception is failing to see that these are logical functioning systems. The Olivar corporate town works, it generates profit, the debt slavery farms work, they produce food and concentrate wealth.
They just happen to be inhumane.
They are inhumane, but they are stable. Systems-level analysis changes visibility. Earthseed allows Lauren to see change as it is, not as she wishes it to be. She perceives the process of history, while everyone else only perceives the loss of their comfort.
She sees that a tree cannot grow in its parent shadows.
And that is structural clarity. Survival depends on perceiving reality without the filter of denial or nostalgia. You have to see the system to shape the system.
That is a profound place to land. It makes you wonder about our own systems right now. How often do we look at algorithmically driven digital spaces, our own modern walled gardens, and fail to see the incentive architecture turning us against our neighbors? We might not have paint-setting literal fires, but we definitely have systems addicted to the engagement of burning things down. It's something to consider as you look at the macro institutions you rely on every day. Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.